Good evening, everyone. Thanks to you all for attending this planning meeting on the 28th of March 2023. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Councillor June Molyneux, Chair of the Committee. Councillor Alex Hilton is Vice Chair. Please note the meeting is also being streamed live on YouTube. If you've joined the meeting on Teams because you're a member of the public who's registered to speak, please note that we'll have a time limit of up to 3 minutes. The legal officer will operate a stopwatch and confirm when your time runs out. You should then finish, or if in the middle of making a point, wind up within a few seconds and finish speaking. Otherwise, your microphone will be muted. For ease, a pack's been prepared which contains report, plans, presentation slides and any addendum for each item to ensure everyone can easily follow the agenda. That's available online. After officers have presented the report and speakers have made their representations, I'll invite members to make any comments. When you want to speak, please raise your hand to indicate that to me. When I'm invited to speak, please turn on your microphone, but switch this off when you've finished speaking. When speaking, please reference the paragraph number to allow everyone to follow you. So the first item, any apologies? Which I don't think there are.
There's no apologies, Chair.
Well done, committee. I don't often see you all. There's usually one. Declarations of any interest. No, sorry, the minutes. Yeah, they're not on. Can somebody move the minutes of the last planning meeting, please, on the 7th of March? I say that's seconded as well. All those in favour? Thank you. Declarations of any interest. Members are reminded of their responsibility to declare any pecuniary interest in respect of matters contained in the agenda. If you have such an interest, you must withdraw from the meeting. Normally you would leave the room before the business starts to be discussed, but you do, however, have the same right to speak as a member of the public and may remain in the room to enable you to do this and then leave immediately. In either case, you must not seek to improperly influence a decision. So, item 3 are the planning applications to be determined. There are 6 planning applications. Plans to be considered will be displayed at the meeting or may be viewed in advance on the website. For the benefit of the public here tonight, the speaking arrangements for planning applications as follows. The officers will summarise the report and registered speakers will be invited to speak in the following order: objector, supporter, parish or town councillor, ward councillor, applicant or agent. All registered speakers will be allowed to speak for 3 minutes, apart from a ward councillor who may speak for 5 minutes. In the event that all speakers are against an application, as chair, I may grant the applicant or representative a time extension. I would respectfully ask that members of the public who have not registered to speak remain quiet throughout the proceedings, and could you all please turn your phones to silent. So moving on, item A has been withdrawn. So we are moving on. We're going back to original plans. Item B, which is how many pieces of paper? Land east of Town Lane, Whittle-Le-Woods, pages 7 to 26, with an update on your addendum. Ian's going to present this item, and the officer's recommendation is that permission in principle is granted subject to conditions. I have 2 registered speakers, the objector, Mark Clifford, and the ward councillor, Councillor Margaret France. Ian, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. This application seeks permission in principle for up to 9 detached dwellings on land to the east of 48 Town Lane in Whittle-Le-Woods. The application site is open grassland located within a wider area of safeguarded land as defined by policy BNE 3 of the Chorley local plan. The scope of applications seeking permission in principle is limited to location, land use and amount of development. Other matters must be considered at the technical details consent stage should permission in principle be granted. As such, matters relating to contamination, highways, ecology, surface water drainage and amenity impacts fall outside of what the local planning authority can assess as part of this current application. Policy BNE 3 indicates that development other than that permitted in the countryside, whether greenbelt or an area of other open countryside, will not be permitted. The proposed development would not be a form of development permitted in either of these areas, and therefore it would be contrary to this policy. The adverse impact of the development relates solely to its conflict with policy BNE3 at this stage, when only the principle of development is in issue. This must be weighed against any benefits and other material circumstances. It must be recognised that the Council cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, and therefore the tilted balance must be engaged in line with paragraph 11D of the framework. Whilst policy BNE3 is broadly consistent with the framework, it is out of date as it safeguards land based on the housing requirements set in policy 4 of the core strategy, which is also out of date. The conflict with policy BNE3 is therefore only afforded limited weight in the planning balance. The proposal will boost the supply of housing, albeit on a small scale, in a situation where there is no 5-year housing supply, and as a result, significant weight can be given to the social benefits of the proposal. It's considered that the economic benefits from the proposal will be modest and so afforded moderate weight. It's not considered that the adverse impacts relating to the conflict with policy BNE3 would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the economic and social benefits of the proposal when applying the tilted balance. The scheme therefore benefits from the presumption in favour of sustainable development. Overall, therefore, the principle of erecting up to 9 dwellings at the application site is considered acceptable in terms of location, land use and amount of development, as the adverse impacts of the proposal do not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the economic and social benefits it would deliver.
And demonstrably outweigh the benefits, when assessed against the policies in the framework taken as a whole.
What was that like? Hearing yourself?
Is that what I sound like? I didn't realise I sounded like that. Only one more sentence. It is. It is therefore recommended. Oh dear.
Councillor Heaton, you need to turn off the closed captions.
This is why I don't have one of these.
That's why I don't touch it.
I hope mine doesn't start going.
Do you want to welcome? Just a moment while we try and sort this out.
It's really hammering that point home. Start. I'll do the whole paragraph again.
And demonstrably outweigh the benefits, when assessed against the policies in the framework taken as.
That's definitely not you.
Anyway, it seems there's plenty of benefits.
Anyway,
Only 2.
carry on with your last sentence, Ian.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Overall, therefore, the principle of erecting up to 9 dwellings at the application site is considered to be acceptable in terms of location, land use and amount of development, as the adverse impacts of the proposal do not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits, the economic and social benefits it would deliver. It is therefore recommended that permission in principle be granted subject to conditions. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Thanks. Mark, do you want to speak now, please? You could have been there,
No, thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's working. Members, I call on you to refuse this application, as the application location should state former landfill on land 85 metres east of Town Lane, Whittle-Le-Woods, and not just land. I believe that is a technical matter, and it has been misdescribed for this application. The addendum states, which hopefully you've all read the addendum that's come out, no further letters of objection have been received, setting out the following issues. Highway safety issues. Where is the report from Lancashire County Council saying they have no objection? Have they been consulted? Presence of contaminated materials and gases and them all. The Environment Agency holds a file on this site. Now, where is that report from the Environment Agency? Again, were they consulted at this point? It is a fact that council officers and myself are awaiting a meeting with Stuart MacDonald of the Environment Agency to discuss 2 contaminated sites in Whittle-Le-Woods, with this one being one of them. Surface water drainage issues. Listen to this from North West Water. This site presents a high risk of pollution to surface water due to its topography and close proximity to a tributary of the River Lostock. The evidence exists on this, and the list goes on and on. If you are minded to not refuse the site, if you're reminded to refuse the site, I recommend you at least defer the decision until a full environmental report is completed, as the impacts of this proposal certainly outweighs the economic and social benefits it would deliver. There is a large file with damning information. This one from Lancashire County Council. However, I would like to take this opportunity to advise you that this site has a somewhat checkered planning history involving both our authorities. Tipping operations were allowed and appealed by the Secretary of State in November 1981, subject to a number of planning conditions, which subsequently proved inadequate to effectively control this site. This is the problem. This is a site that was never get, because it was before the Control of Pollution Act 1974. We've got many witnesses. I've spoke to those witnesses personally. I even spoke to a driver who put some of this stuff in. So yes, there's plenty of evidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. You'll be glad to know I'm going to be brief. Councillor Clifford has raised most of the points. I'm aware, because this is a permission in principle, that some of the issues are not really taken into consideration at this stage, but would go through to the full planning application when it came before committee. But nonetheless, I think it's worth repeating them. This is a contaminated landfill site with the danger of releasing potential pollutants into the River Lostock, of which runs quite close by. And it's also near to the biological heritage site. The highways issues also, I understand, is not for discussion here, but I'd like to recommend members that the 250 houses were disallowed by this Borough Council, and that was held up at appeal by the Planning Inspectorate. So the Contaminated Land Officer report mentions that there is known landfill gas and asbestos on the site, and the potential for illegal and unlicensed tipping in the past, contributing to further hazardous waste, of which we don't really know what that consists of. I don't believe that this does support the objections of the National Planning Policy Framework. And if you look at paragraph 29, I think it would make a lot more sense to defer this until assessments are made of the suitability of the site under the emerging Central Lancashire Local Plan, moving into its preferred options, part 2, later on this year. Paragraph 37 says that permission should be granted unless there is any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in this framework taken as a whole. Now, I don't think 9 dwellings is going to have a considerable impact on the social amenity against the number of houses that we're required to build. And I would disagree with paragraph 38. I think the risk of polluting the River Lostock from waste materials outweighs any potential benefits. Thank you.
Thanks. Do you want to come back on that, Ian? Okay?
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify for members, the government introduced in 2017 a 2-stage process involving the permission in principle applications, which are a light touch exercise purely concerned with policy. Technical details then follow after a second stage. It's called the technical details consent stage, whereby a full planning application essentially would follow on from any permission in principle application. So no technical consultations have been carried out in relation to this application because it's not something where we can require reports or we can assess those details as part of the assessment. That would have to come at the next stage where the full application is submitted if this were to be granted. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks. It's over to you, members. Councillor Heaton?
Thank Chair, can I just clarify that? What we're saying is, we give it permission in principle, they would then have to do the ground testing to find any pollutants or waste that is contaminated. So that would have to be done before they could put a full planning application in.
Ian. Through you, Chair. If at the next stage, sorry, Chair. At the next stage, when you're applying for the technical details consent, any applicant who's well advised would put together a contaminated land report. They'd have to get a full understanding of what's beneath the ground and how it should be or could be remediated. And at that point, the council would consult the Environment Agency, obviously our own contaminated land expert and anyone else.
So you're saying it's not, it's advisory, but it's not mandatory? Is that what you're saying?
Through you, Chair. If an application came forward and it didn't include those details, then it may well form a reason for refusal if the technical consultees come back and say this detail is absolutely required before
We
it
can't
can
put
be
a condition
determined.
on it that it has to be done before it comes to any further planning.
Through you, Chair. It would be in the developer's interest to provide that information, because if they didn't, then it's possible that they would receive a refusal on that basis, because it's not a condition that we could attach to this application. It's simply a detail that you will be sensible to provide at the next stage, because it's highly likely that a consultee such as the Environment Agency or our own contaminated land officer would be requiring that information. So if you didn't provide it at the outset, it could delay an applicant because they'd have to provide the information along the way, and if they didn't, it could be detrimental to the outcome of their application. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I'm minded to refuse this one. I mean, I know it's a planning principle, but it's the interpretation of BNE 3, and I think there is reasons on interpretation to actually refuse this. So that's where I'm minded to go, but I will listen to other members first.
Thanks, Chair. The members across the road have identified significant concerns about this particular site. I'm not sure that if we give it permission in principle, I listened to what Ian said, but if we give it permission in principle suggests to the applicant that they're halfway there, I think it would be worthwhile, if we're going to get this information, I think it would be worthwhile deferring this application until we get the information, and that will either confirm or not the concerns that have been made, and then we can make a decision more in a more well-informed way. Because if we give permission now, it seems to suggest that, okay, we're just got to find reasons not to do. I think there are reasons that have been identified for deferring it. And I propose deference. Thank you, Chair.
Adele wants to come in at this point.
I just want to make it clear what this process involves, because it's not a planning application. It's a two-stage process, and it's not possible to wait for the details to come in, because they would come in at a technical matters stage. This is simply a permission in principle stage. And like Ian explained, it's a very light such process. Lots of sites are contaminated. We've had, there's been other sites in the borough that have been cleaned and mitigated. It may well be, once those reports come in, that it proves to be an unviable proposition to develop it for housing. But at this stage, we're simply looking at, is it acceptable in principle? Members will be aware, we've had other similar proposals in the Greenbelt where clearly it's not acceptable in principle. Similarly, if an application came forward for housing development on employment land that was allocated through the development plan, that's not acceptable in principle. With regard to the safeguarded site issue, members will be well aware of the arguments that have been rehearsed previously in respect of the outdatedness of policy BNE 3 and the lack of a 5-year housing land supply that can not be demonstrated in Chorley. So in that respect, this is simply looking at, is it acceptable in principle? All the matters of ecology issues and contaminated land and all the other matters would be subject to detailed technical reports at the technical matters stage. And I appreciate it's quite difficult to get your head around, and this is a relatively new regime. But in my professional opinion, it doesn't really move it on a lot further forward than the local plan designation of safeguarded land. It doesn't get them halfway there, if you like. It's just simply confirmation that it is an acceptable development in principle. All the other matters and the concerns we can't bring into consideration at this point in time. They would be subject to further assessment at technical matter stage, and we can't not determine a permission in principle application until the technical matters come forward. It has to be determined on the basis it's been submitted.
Councillor Boardman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm afraid I agree with the Del. This is a safeguarded land site within Chorley's plan. It wouldn't be in there if it wasn't suitable for residential development. The fact that it's contaminated land, or maybe contaminated land, is something that will be picked up at a future stage, and we can't really comment against this application. So on that basis, I'm minded to go with the officer's recommendation and approve it on the basis that it is just a planning in principle. And like Councillor Whittaker says, it doesn't go to halfway. It is basically literally a very light touch. There is a very long way to go with this site, and I'm sure this committee will see it again at some point.
Okay, Councillor Morwood, Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, wrong button. Thank you, Chair. Reiterate what Councillor Boardman said. It's a light touch, it's safeguarded land. Basically, the developer is trying to get a feel of what they might be able to do or not. And if they've any sense, they've listened to what's been said, and they'll go away and they'll think very hard about what they may or may not do. And it will, and then at that stage, no doubt, if they come back, those points that have been raised today will be raised again, and we can actually look at them in detail and say, well, is this a reason for refusal or not? But at this moment in time, it's literally, as it says, a light touch in principle, and so I'm happy to second the officer's proposal.
Councillor Sherwood.
Thank you, Chair. So if this is in principle, if we go to page 9, paragraph 11, the contaminated land officer has said, I'm concerned about this proposal to develop housing on the former landfill site. So there is already comments that might be in a further proposal. Mention the historical problems with landfill sites. I mean, we've got anecdotal comments about mini explosions on page 8, paragraph 9. So it's what I'm saying is, Chair, is that there's already these comments coming in at this stage, which is sort of halfway to me.
Do you want to come back, Adele?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make it clear that this is essentially simply a theoretical exercise. I don't think there's any doubt that there's likely to be high levels of contamination, and a significant amount of remediation work would be necessary to make the land safe for future development. That would be subject to future assessment at a technical matter stage.
Application, we'd be able to refuse it. Being as in principle, we can't. So I feel like we're almost getting our arms twisted about our back. That may not be the intention, but that's how it feels. You will do this because there is no reason not to. If we agree in principle, I don't believe that the applicant is going to come back and say, well, it was agreed in principle, and I don't have to do that, so I'm not going to do that. And it's not contaminated, but I don't need proof.
If we refuse it then, they can then go, a more cynical person was saying, if we refuse it then, they will go to appeal and the government would uphold it. That's my concern, that we're going to get railroaded.
Just to be clear, it's a massive leap to suggest that an inspector would overturn any decision of this authority. I can only give you the assurances that I've given you earlier, that the technical matters stage is the time when the technical detailed reports will be submitted, and they will look at flood risk, highway safety impacts, ecology impacts, impacts on amenity and contaminated land. So this is essentially, as I said, a theoretical exercise to say permission, it's acceptable in principle, but the development plan already effectively says that, because it's safeguarded for future development. And with respect to Councillor France, I know when she spoke, she talks about waiting until we get further along the local plan process. It's not possible to delay it until we get to that stage. At this point in time, there can be no doubt that this land is designated as safeguarded land. And as I said, members are well aware of the situation in Chorley with regard to the ability to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. So all the other matters, and I hear what members say, but those matters of contamination, which is probably the most overarching concern that members and residents have, would be picked up at the technical matters stage. It is a different regime, it's not a planning application, and it was only introduced back in 2017 to give developers some element of certainty, but it doesn't overcome the need to provide the technical details further along the process.
Councillor Frank. I've got Councillor France down.
Thank you, Chair. As I say, I was minded to propose refusal on BNE3, but also I will go along with Councillor Whittaker's recommendation for deferral, so I will second that. Proposals, shall I say, I'm sorry.
Councillor Marwood.
Can I ask, defer for what reason? What are you expecting to come along before this comes back? As
my problem is I cannot support an application like this with the serious matters concerned. I've seen some of these papers and there's no way I can support that in my ward. I'm sorry.
Councillor France, it's not an application.
Planning in principle.
Principle.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Yeah.
The regime's changed. We're going to have to think differently as well. This is the first part of a process.
I think if members are minded to defer it, there needs to be clear and convincing reasons for the deferment. Is there a specific reason to defer it? If members are concerned about the prospects of granting permission in principle, then with the greatest respect, you need to be thinking about refusing it and articulating a reason to refuse it rather than deferring it, because there are no, from my professional perspective, I can't see any reasons to defer it because no more information can come forward, and the grant of permission in principle doesn't give it's not a permission to build. I think if members are minded to defer, there needs to be clear planning reasons to defer it. There is, I can only say there is no additional information that we can seek as part of this regime.
And can I just say that just because we give permission in principle doesn't mean to say the application, when and if it comes along, will be accepted. Correct. This isn't the end of the line, this is the beginning of it.
Thank you, Chair.
Sure it's short.
It is short. None of us like it, but I propose second Councillor Boardman's proposal to accept.
Already been seconded.
Oh, sorry. In that case, I'll shut up.
No, I'm going to move to the vote. I'm sorry, I think we've all said enough. Okay, I've had a proposer and a seconder for deferral, but I don't know any reasons for deferral, so... Vote no. This is, yeah, for deferral. Eh? To defer. Never mind, I think. You never mind, you've lost. Okay.
Members have voted against deferring the application for...
Okay, now can we vote in favour of the officer recommendation, please? Okay.
Members have voted to grant permission in principle subject to conditions.
Okay, thank you. If you've come for that item and you want to go, please feel free. Item C and D have been withdrawn, so now we're up to item E. Can I have a big stick? '27 to 60 with an update on your addendum. Who's presenting it? Because I've got you both here. Ian's going to present this item. The officer's recommendation, planning permission is granted subject to conditions. I have two registered speakers, the objector Simon Miskell and the agent Courtney Everson. Off you go, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. This application seeks planning permission for the erection of 2 detached dwellings and garages on land to the south of Mayfield in Mawdesley. The application site is located in the Greenbelt on Bluestone Lane and comprises open garden land between Mayfield to the north and the garden area of Bluestone Barn to the south. The framework and local plan allow for limited infilling in villages in the Greenbelt. The application site is considered to form part of the functional area of the village of Mawdesley. The site itself lies within a frontage of development along Bluestone Lane, with buildings to either side, and is considered to meet the definition of infill development. It's also noted that permission in principle was granted on appeal for a single dwelling at this site in July 2022, and this consent remains extant. The planning inspector at that time considered the site met the definition of limited infilling in a village, and as such the proposal is considered to be acceptable in principle. In consideration of the impact on the character of the site, the character of the area, the site is capable of supporting 2 dwellings at a density reflective of other examples in the locality. The dwellings would face the highway and will be of a design and scale not uncommon to the wider area of Mawdesley. The outbuildings will be appropriately positioned and of an appropriate design and scale, making use of an existing structure for the gatehouse. As such, there will be no significantly detrimental impact on the appearance of the site or character of the area. The positioning of the dwellings is such that there will be no unacceptably adverse impacts on the amenity of nearby residential occupiers. There will be no adverse ecological impacts from the development, subject to the provision of landscaping and biodiversity enhancement details, whilst a detailed surface water drainage scheme would be required by condition. LCC Highways have confirmed that they have no objection, subject to the provision of a construction traffic management plan, which is recommended to be secured by condition. Overall, the proposed development is considered to be in accordance with the policies of the development plan and is recommended for approval subject to the conditions set out in the addendum. Thank you, Chair.
Simon, you want to carry on?
Thank you. I'm Simon Miskell. Good evening. I've never been called an objector before. I've never spoken. I'm not a member of any environmental group. I don't do social media. So I'm just a very concerned resident, and I know that other residents have turned out today also. So I want to talk about the impact for local people, the impact on the environment, and significantly to explore the actions and the legality of the developer. Just some context, the old lady, Evelyn, that sadly died there, I used to sort of shovel her snow, do her trip switches in the evening when the electric went off. And it was bought, and fair play to the local residents. No one objected to that. Everyone was fully supportive. It went from being 1 bungalow to 2 houses, and then further extended, 300% increase in size. Since that time, there seems to be a process of building a fence next to it, asking for infill, building another fence, asking for infill. Paul Weaver and other residents who couldn't speak, so I'll just briefly summarise, refers to the local planning policy, BNE 5, as the site's already been hugely developed and it goes into a domestic garden. So continue with splitting. So since the place was 300% increase, the developer smashed a hole through the garage, as you might have seen on the photographs, drives over the pavement, uses the site for waste from various sites. When it builds up to about 20 foot high, he sets a fire, drives off, attends daily with building equipment, so it's turned into a builder's yard. He then felled every mature tree, that's why there's a huge gap in the middle, 200-year-old oak trees and chestnuts, and removed those under the cover of darkness. So the main point I would also like to make is the legality of this, because there was a submission of an environmental impact which was made. I believe that this is made dishonestly. It's a false representation. It's made to make a gain for the developer. It's untrue, it is misleading, and the person knows that. What I've just quoted there is Section 2 of the Fraud Act of 2006, ladies and gentlemen. This developer was confronted when felling those trees and has then since made a misleading statement to this chamber, which is a criminal act. So I would suggest that given that information, it's a very serious matter. You may wish to refer this to the council, solicitor, or other agencies, such as the seriousness of that.
Thank you. Courtney, do you wish to speak now?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Firstly, all the objections raised this evening have been addressed within the application submission, and the planning officer has covered all relevant considerations resulting in the development being recommended for approval. The application site has previously been subject to an appeal for the erection of one dwelling. The appeal was allowed, and the appeal decision found that the proposed development could be regarded as limited infilling in a village. Therefore, the principle of limited infilling on the site is established as not inappropriate development in the greenbelt. The character of the area comprises a clearly identifiable built-up frontage that is located along the side of the road. The application site lies within this frontage with buildings to either side, and the site does not extend this frontage. I would like to reiterate the planning officer's comments that since the appeal was determined, the surrounding site conditions have not altered materially. The dwellings would fit within the same frontage and are of a similar proportion to other dwellings in the locality. The appeal decision confirms that the principle of development on the site has been established, and as detailed within the officer's report, the proposed development would not extend the frontage and would fill a small gap in an otherwise built-up frontage, regardless of whether the development was for a single dwelling or two dwellings. As a result, the proposed development would not be an appropriate development in the greenbelt, and there would be no detrimental impact on the character or the appearance of the area. In assessing that the site can accommodate two dwellings, the impact upon neighbouring amenity has been considered and found to be acceptable and policy compliant. Site sustainability has also been taken into consideration, including access to public transport, schools, businesses and local services and facilities. Given the extent of the nearby development to Town Gate and the presence of nearby amenities commonly associated with a village, as well as the nearby villages of Mawdesley and Eccleston, the application site forms part of the functional area of a village, and the proposals represent a sustainable form of development. As stated earlier, all issues relating to highways, ecology and landscaping have been addressed within the application documents submitted as part of the planning application, and have been dealt with accordingly through the relevant conditions. Overall, the proposed development will not have an unacceptable impact on highway safety, ecology, heritage assets or amenity, and we strongly agree with the Council's recommendation of approval. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Do you? I don't know. Okay, over to you, members. Councillor Morwood. Councillor Boardman.
There's been a lot said this evening from the objector and the agent. And I do know the site well. In fact, a number of members on this committee know that site well. At the moment, I do not like the scale of it. I do not like the size at all, where it is. I totally accept that it's infill. And I'd just like to read what the inspector said when they applied way back for 2 dwellings. And it went to appeal because we turned it down. I therefore conclude that the proposed development of a single dwelling on the appeal site can be regarded as limited infilling in villages, meeting the exceptions listed at paragraph 149, etc. The important part there is a single dwelling. He looked at the two and he thought, yeah, a single dwelling is appropriate. And I would agree with that, although I'm still not sure about the scale and the size of it. At the moment, I'm minded to refuse it, to go against the proposal. But I really think there's been so much said about this site, and the pictures don't quite tell it all. And I love the proposed, if I can find it, the gatehouse. The gatehouse, yes, knocking a hole in the cottage that was there before. I'm not even sure how you get a removal van through there. I'd like to propose a site visit, to be perfectly honest, so that members who are not really familiar with this area could have a good look at it and judge it for themselves. In terms of the scale and the mass of these houses and exactly where it is. I'm shocked, well, I don't know why I'm shocked about LCC highways, that they think it's fine to have 2 exits coming onto, because it comes down to a 30 mile an hour, it goes from 40 to 30 at that point, so everybody's going to be very careful. It goes at 30 miles an hour, about 10 yards from a 90-degree bend. So most people a lot of people career around that bend, and those coming in the opposite direction, if you don't keep into the hedge, you can be in for a nasty shock. So I really think it would be useful for those who are not familiar with the area to have a good look at this area and see what they think. But I'll see what everyone else says. Thank you.
Councillor Boardman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Likewise, I agree with the majority that Councillor Morwood has said, but I'll just thank Mr Miskell for speaking and just outlining what the actual site currently is. The site is not a garden site. The site is a builder's yard at the minute, and it's been used to store builder's debris, and it has been for a number of months, as per the photographs we said. That being said, there's not a great deal we can do about that now. So I'm just going to lay out what I believe the site is and where I stand on this. I accept that the appeal officer and his decisions has made this, that it is a lawful limited infill site. I'm more than happy with that, and it's suitable for a single dwelling. However, as this application is for 2 dwellings, and although 1 to 2 dwellings is deemed acceptable with our own local plan, I don't believe that the scale, size and massing of these 2 dwellings will complement the character of that rural area. And I'll quote a couple of policies for you before I go on a bit further, and I'll just get them on before my iPad freezes, and it's just frozen. Just 1 second, I'll have to bear with me 1 second. And I've got my password wrong. 1 second. There we go. So, we have several policies in our local plan, as we all know. Policy BNE1, which is a critical policy for us. Planning permission will be granted for new developments, including extensions, conversions and freestanding structures, providing that were relevant development to the development. The proposal does not have a significantly detrimental impact on the existing buildings, neighbouring buildings or on the street scene by virtue of density, siting, layout, buildings plot ratio, height, scale, massing, design, materials. The development would not cause harm to neighbouring property by virtue of overlooking, overshadowing, overbearing. There's another one about layout and design. The proposal would not adversely affect the character or setting of the listed building. There's no listed buildings in there, but character is crucial. That's policy BNE1. We have another policy, which is HS7. Just 1 second. I'll just go to that. 22. And HS7 is for limited infilling within rural areas. Within smaller villages, limited infilling for housing will be permitted provided the applicant can demonstrate the following criteria are met. The existing buildings form a clearly identifiable built-up frontage. The appeals officer has stated that that is the case. However, I question that because in front of the built-up frontage is the gatehouse, which is currently a was a two-car garage and a store, and is now a two-car garage with a hole in the middle. The site lies within the frontage. The buildings on either side of its development does not extend the frontage. It doesn't. The proposal would complement the character and setting of the existing buildings. We need to ask ourselves the question, the 2 3-storey dwellings made of red brick, townhouse in style, will they complement the existing rural area? That's setting the scene. I'll just do a little bit more information for you. To the north of the site is the converted Mayfield, which is a dormer-style, 1.5-storey pair of semi-detached houses. To the south and adjacent to the site is a reclaimed brick barn conversion with outbuildings of a rural and agricultural nature. And opposite the site to the west is a 200-year-old brick cottage with mature planting and mature trees that basically overbear into the road. The whole area is, in my mind, rural and agricultural in its design. And I don't believe that the 2 dwellings will complement the area. So on those grounds, I'm going to move for refusal.
Councillor Eden first.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think we had this last time. I reminisced about my time as a young man coming down Bluestone Lane, and I've been travelling that lane for well over 50 years. And now termed as Bluestone Boulevard. We don't have all the things that we used to have. We used to have a lot of trees, we used to have a lot of sheep in fields and cows. It's a narrow road. We used to have pigeon lofts, and we used to have pigeons flying around, we had ducks and the whole thing, and I'm not reminiscent with that. But it's just a changing scene, and it's just ruined a lovely place called Bluestone Lane. So I will second Councillor Boardman and remember the times when I travelled down a beautiful lane called Bluestone Lane, which is now Bluestone Boulevard, as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Okay, what we need to do before we go any further is we need to have a short recess to get these these concerns nailed, basically.
A recess for?
To get the reasons for refusal.
Sorry, mine weren't good enough, but I'm sure it
No, but we do. I'm sorry, yeah.
I appreciate that Councillor Mawdesley articulated his concerns, but it needs to be formulated into a reason for refusal, setting out what the harm is and the policies that it's contrary to. Everything was there, but it just needs to be articulated into a reason for refusal.
Councillor Marwood.
I was writing a few notes as Councillor Boardman, so yeah, I'll read what I've got, and if that makes sense, then you won't have to recess. The proposed dwellings would be of such scale and mass that they would be out of keeping with the character of the street frontage and significantly detrimental to the character of the surrounding area, contrary to policy HS7 and BNE1 of the Chorley Local Plan 2012 to 26. Nearly there. Well, if you can...
Go on.
Sorry.
Okay. So, Adele's comfortable with that. Thank you, Councillor Marwood. You've saved us some time. Any more comments?
I was going to like some clarification on it. There's something I'm not understanding. Paragraph 10, subpara 2, says that permission in principle for 2 dwellings was refused previously on this site. Subparagraph 4 says permission in principle for 1 dwelling was refused. Having just gone through all the planning in principle and how difficult it is to refuse anything, on
Yeah.
such a site as it was. Is it true that they were refused?
Yes,
Why were they refused?
But that is
And what's changed from then to
yeah,
now?
Adele.
I think if you recall, when I spoke on the first item, I did say permission in principle. Things like if it's in the green belt, we would say it's not acceptable in principle. And the two previous applications on this site that you've referred to were both refused essentially on those grounds that it didn't constitute an infill site in the green belt. The first scheme for 2 houses wasn't the subject of an appeal. The second scheme for 1 house was, and an inspector overturned our decision and basically established the acceptability in principle of that site being an infill site. And that is a material consideration in the assessment of this application. The motion that's been moved in terms of rejecting it, and that was articulated in the reason for refusal by Councillor Marwood, is such that it accepts that in principle position, but feels that the details aren't acceptable.
Okay, so we're going to have a short recess while we sort it out, nailed everything down. Okay, can we get back to business, please? Thank you. Okay, where are we up to? I've lost my plan. So we want the... Are you going to read out the
So
reasons?
the proposed reason for refusal is that the proposed dwellings would be of such design, scale and massing that they would be out of keeping with the character of the street frontage and significantly detrimental to the character of the surrounding area, contrary to policy HS7 and BNE1 of the Chorley Local Plan 2012-2026.
Okay. So that's the amendment and the reasons for refusal. Any more comments before I move to the vote? No. Right, let's move to the vote, please. All those in favour of the amendment?
Members have voted to refuse full planning permission for the reasons set out.
Please do. Item 3F. I've lost my plate. This is what happens. There it is. Got it? It got buried. Lower Wood End Farm, Back Lane, Clayton-Le-Woods, pages 61 to 106. Adele's going to present this item. The planning permission is granted subject to conditions and the signing of the legal agreement. I have two registered speakers, the objector Gary Collinson and the agent Tom Smith on Teams. Tom, can you hear us and speak?
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent. Adele, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. The application site is located in the Greenbelt, just outside and immediately to the west of the defined settlement boundary of Clayton-Le-Woods. Whilst the area is not identified for growth under Policy 1 of the Central Lancashire Core Strategy, the policy does allow for small-scale development and therefore the proposal is compliant in this respect. The site contains a cluster of buildings consisting of Lower Wood End Farm, which includes a farmhouse, brick barn and stone barn, along with some more modern agricultural buildings. Planning permission is sought for the demolition of the existing farmhouse and the erection of a replacement dwelling, the conversion of a brick-built barn to 2 dwellings and a stone-built barn to 1 dwelling, and other associated works. The site is owned by the Curdon Valley Park Trust, who state they are a charity focused on the conservation of the country park, the delivery of education and engagement with the local and wider community. They wish to sell the site to help stabilise their finances and reinvest in the park facilities. A full assessment of the proposal is set out in the committee report, and members will note that officers do not consider that the proposed development is unacceptable development in the Greenbelt. This is due to the proposal meeting exceptions within the framework for replacement dwellings and the reuse of buildings and very special circumstances existing for the erection of 2 small outbuildings to serve the proposed barn conversions. There are no outstanding objections to the scheme from technical consultees, subject to the imposition of conditions. 4 representations have been received in objections to the proposal. Again, these are detailed in the report. And 1 neither objecting nor supporting the proposal, but raising issues that include highway safety, loss of heritage assets and impacts on neighbouring residents. Whilst the buildings are not statutorily or locally listed, they are of some heritage value. The Council's Heritage Advisor has concluded that the heritage value of the buildings is low and the loss of value caused by the demolition of the farmhouse is slight. Officers consider that, on balance, the benefits of the proposal in improving the appearance of the barns, the site as a whole, and the financial benefits to the Trust with subsequent social benefits to users of the Curdon Valley Park comfortably outweigh the heritage harm. Conditions are recommended requiring the buildings to be recorded prior to any work commencing and archaeological investigations to take place with regards to any buried remains of the original farmhouse, which the current farmhouse replaced. The proposal would not adversely affect neighbouring residential amenity, with the nearest neighbouring property located approximately 80 metres from the proposed dwellings, and would provide acceptable living conditions for future occupants of the development. The proposed development is considered to be well designed and would not be harmful to the character and appearance of the area. The officer recommendation is to approve, subject to conditions, and a Section 106 agreement as explained in the committee report. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Adele. Gary, would you like to speak now, please?
Thank you, Chair. My name is Gary Collinson, and I'm speaking as an objector in the capacity of a neighbour to the proposed development, also as a horticultural expert and property developer myself. I submitted an objection on the 1st of the 11th and would ask that those objections raised are perhaps revisited. I noted that Lancashire County Council also shared my concerns about the site access visibility displays in their letter dated the 17th of November. Lancashire County Council's recommendation essentially stated that for safety concerns, without a clear westerly sightline display, the application could not be supported. The suggestion was to reduce undergrowth of the area maintained by Chorley Council and thereafter maintain as a grass verge. I would urge LCC to revisit this issue, as it is clear, even with such measures in place, that the visibility display is still significantly impeded by both trees and the height of the banking. Applying the visibility display model highlighted in Lancashire County Council's policy and design guidance of 2010, Section 5, 10.5 will clearly show this. The slight bend in the road at the brow of the hill also exasperates this. Additionally, Lancashire County Council's initial proposal would leave the integrity of the visibility display to vegetative growth. The application fails to demonstrate that the proposal will provide safe and adequate visibility displays on access to the site. Further, due to the restrictions of the single track 165 metre access road that does not facilitate the passing of two cars and has no passing points, it is therefore inevitable that cars or construction vehicles entering the track will end up having to reverse back out onto back lane where the visibility display is already compromised. Any further development of the track will compromise the drainage ditches on both sides of the track and significantly impact on the mortality rate of the mature trees lining both sides of that track along the full 165 metre length. In conclusion, access to this development site is unsuitable, in my opinion.
Thank you. Tom, would you like to speak now? Tom?
Yep. Thank you to the committee for the opportunity to speak this evening, and thank you to the councillors for their assistance with this application. And I will request that the Planning Committee concurs with the recommendation for approval. As stated, the Curedon Valley Park Trust owns the site, and the redevelopment will release much needed funds for the management and maintenance of the wider park area, which was regarded as an asset within the local community in terms of education, rural tourism, biodiversity and ecology. We are particularly grateful for the thorough input of the Council's archaeological team and from Growth Lancashire, and we are in agreement with our recommended planning conditions made by the archaeological team with regard to site investigations prior to the commencement of development. A significant amount of time has been spent in the development of the design proposals, which are grounded in a thorough understanding of the site, and where additional information and further investigation has been required, this has been provided gladly and has directed design alterations which we, along with the Council's planning authority, conclude that the overall development is suitable. Each of the proposed works have been carefully considered for their sustainability within the rural context, and where an assessment has been provided by the archaeological team or Growth Lancashire, amendments have been made. We are grateful for their input. Individually, each of the proposed works, the replacement dwelling in the Greenbelt and barn conversions, are well established and with precedent within the Chorley borough. Together, the whole development forms a well and sensitively designed proposal and a high quality collection of dwellings in a rural and yet sustainable location. In regard to highway safety and access, the comments by the objector are well noted. However, I would refer back to Lancashire County Council's conclusions that provided that that grass verge is maintained, no further requirements are needed and the development proposals are acceptable. With regard to heritage, this has been well documented by a number of objectors, and whilst I noticed that hasn't been mentioned this evening, it has been mentioned by others. The site is well established as a former farmyard, and its heritage is well documented, going back to date prior to the 1800s. Unfortunately, the original farmhouse, which was on site prior to 1848, no longer remains, but ground investigations will be undertaken prior to the commencement of work to determine the presence of this building before any development can take place. I'm grateful to the assistance by the Planning Authority and by Growth Lancashire and by the archaeological team for their assistance with this application, and we hope that the committee members can conclude that this application is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, members, it's over to you. Somebody out there. Councillor Hilton.
Thank you, Chair. I have no objections to this development, and I think it'll be a nice development, and if it will help the trust with the park, I'd be very much in favour of it, so I'm happy to propose officer recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sherwood.
I'm happy to second that, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Whittam.
I think this has been looked into very well. The track that leads in there, I would have some concerns with. I believe perhaps some passing places may have to be put in there. It's, having walked up there, it doesn't seem too wide, but all in all, I think it's a good idea. It's obviously on Greenbelt, previously developed, and I think this development, should it go ahead, will enhance the area.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to comment? If not, I'll move to the vote. Okay, let's go to the vote. All those in favour of the officer recommendation, please. Okay.
Members have unanimously voted to grant full planning permission subject to conditions in a Section 106 agreement.
Thank you. Okay, if you've just come for that item and you wish to go, you may. Please feel free. Item 3G, land adjacent to 715 Preston Road, Clayton-Le-Woods, pages 107 to 134, with an update on your addendum. Ian's going to present this item with the officer recommendation, planning permission granted subject to conditions, and then a Section 106 agreement. I have two registered speakers, Ward Councillor Alan Cullens and the agent Louise Leyland. Can you hear us, Ian? Alan? I'll take that as a no. It's not on the call. Oh, well, there's nothing we can do. Ian, present your report.
Thank you, Chair. This application seeks full planning permission for the erection of 3 dwellings following the demolition of the existing buildings on the site. The application site comprises a plot of land to the southwest of 715 Preston Road that was previously used for horticulture and which forms part of the garden area to this dwelling. The site is located within the settlement area of Clayton-Le-Woods, where there's a presumption in favour of sustainable development as set out in the framework and the Chorley local plan, with good access to amenities and public transport. Members may recall that planning permission was granted in November 2020 for a residential development comprising 6 dwellings on this site, and this consent remains extant. The development of the site would not be harmful to the character of the area or the amenity of neighbouring occupiers, and it is considered to be acceptable in principle. A new access road will be constructed off the existing access road and will provide vehicular access to the parking areas serving the proposed dwellings, whilst a new turning head will also be constructed opposite 715 Preston Road. Adequate parking will be provided in line with the council's parking standards, in addition to providing 2 spaces for the existing dwelling at 715 Preston Road. And LCC Highways that have assessed the scheme and raised no objection, subject to conditions. All other matters are acceptable, subject to conditions and appropriate mitigation measures, and overall the proposed development is considered to be in accordance with the policies of the development plan and is recommended for approval subject to the conditions set out in the addendum and the Section 106 agreement. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Ian. Councillor Cullens doesn't appear to be on the call. So have we got Louise, please?
Thank you, Chair and members. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the applicants, Thistle Homes, who are a local building company. Members might be familiar with the site, having previously approved an application for 6 smaller dwellings here in November 2020 on roughly the same footprint. As set out in the officer's report, the site is within the settlement boundary of Clayton Brook in a highly sustainable location, and the principle is considered acceptable, with 2 previous consents for housing on the site. No objections have been received from any statutory consultees, including LCC Highways. The access arrangements replicate those that were approved as part of the 2020 consent. It is not considered that there are any issues with regards to heritage. The Grade 2 listed farmhouse is 190 metres from the site, and the track in the vicinity of the site is not in the listed curtilage. Additionally, there are no views of the farmhouse from the site itself. The overall amount of built development proposed is similar to that of the previously approved scheme for 6 dwellings. Ridge heights are just 3 centimetres taller, whilst a smaller number of larger dwellings gives rise to more space between the plots and larger gardens. It is noted that comments have been made by a member of the public requesting parking be provided for number 717, which is next door but one to the site. This was discussed at the committee meeting for the previous consent, and the application was deferred for this to be looked at further. At that time, LCC Highways found that additional parking was not necessary, and the committee agreed. The same applies to this new scheme. Parking has been provided for the adjacent number 715, however it's not possible or necessary to provide parking for the other properties. In summary, the development would make a small but valuable contribution to housing supply in Chorley and is located sustainably. There are no technical issues or material considerations which suggest permission should not be granted, and I therefore urge the committee to approve the application in line with the recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right. Over to you, members. Councillor Sherwood.
I'd like to propose, please.
Councillor Boardman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm in favour of the application. I have no issue with it, and I've read through the conditions and I'm happy with those. I've only received one comment, and that was from some of the neighbouring properties, and it's to do with existing parking measures at 717, who currently have no parking provision at all in front of their dwelling. I'm not saying that this is something we can do anything about, but the speaker quite clearly made a comment regarding unable to provide parking for the neighbouring dwellings. I just think it's unfortunate because I believe 719 has parking, but 717 doesn't have any, and they utilise a small piece of land opposite the house, which is currently down on the plans for a bin store. So I think nothing really we can do about it, but I'd like to see if the developer could accommodate at least some parking provision for the existing dwelling.
Okay. So I've had a proposer. Will somebody formally second that? Thank you, Councillor Reardon. Any more comments? If not, I'll move to the vote. Please.
There it is. Members have unanimously voted to grant full planning permission subject to conditions in a Section 106 agreement.
Okay. Sorry, I haven't got my microphone on. Seaforth, Crescent, Buckshaw Village, pages 135 to 150. Adele is going to present this item. Planning permission is granted subject to conditions. I have no registered speakers. Adele, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. This application has been brought before the committee as one of the applicants is an elected councillor. The application relates to a detached property located on Seaforth Crescent in Buckshaw Village. The property is a modern dwelling and is surrounded by properties of a similar age and design. There is no recent relevant history of the site to consider. Planning permission is sought to install 3 rear roof lights and 1 front roof light in order to facilitate the provision of second floor living accommodation. No representations have been received to the proposal and there have been no objections from consultees. The proposed alterations would be located to the front and rear of the property and would be visible in the street scene. However, it would not be overly dominant or appear out of place within the immediate context. There would be no adverse impact on the property at number 41 Dorset Drive to the rear of the application property, as there is a distance of approximately 13 metres between the 2 properties. This degree of separation combined with the juxtaposition of the roof lights would be adequate to ensure that there would be no unacceptable impacts on the level of amenity currently enjoyed by the occupiers of this property. The drive has sufficient parking for 2 cars, and the proposed alterations would create an extra bedroom and cause the property to need to have sufficient space for 3 parking spaces. Within the vicinity of the property, there is sufficient unrestricted parking to accommodate the extra parking demand, and on this basis, the proposal is recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Over to you, Councillor Hilton.
Thank you, Chair. We're having to consider this due to this being a member of this council. This would have sailed through under delegated powers. This is just a formality we have to go through, so I would like to propose officer recommendations for approval. Thank you.
Oh, there's 3 of you. Councillor Beaver. Councillor Boardman. Oh, I thought you might have done refusal. Councillor France.
Thirded.
Okay, move to the vote, please. Can I abstain? There you go.
Members have unanimously voted to grant planning permission subject to conditions.
Okay, thank you. And finally is 3I, Christchurch Charnock Richards C.V. Primary School, pages 151 to 170. Adele's going to present this item. Planning Committee be minded to grant planning permission subject to conditions and all that. I've no registered speakers. Adele.
Thank you, Chair. The application relates to the playing field of Christchurch Charnock Richard Church of England Primary School, located on the southern side of Church Lane within the defined settlement boundary of Charnock Richard. The playing field is surrounded by the school building to the north, a scout and guide building to the west on Charter Lane, open fields to the south and dwellings to the east, beyond a multi-use games area. The application seeks planning permission retrospectively for the installation of a running track to the perimeter of the playing field on the outside of 2 5-side football pitches to enable pupils to complete the daily mile exercise. The track is approximately 300 metres long and 1.3 metres wide. No representations have been received in relation to the proposal. There is an outstanding objection from Sport England, who are a statutory consultee for any proposal which may impact the playing field. Their objection is based on the loss of a section of playing field which would not be replaced, and they consider the location of the track affects land laid out as playing pitches and their safety margins. A full assessment of the proposal is contained in the committee report, and members will note that officers do not consider the proposed development would conflict with policies HW1 and HW2 of the Chorley local plan, which relate to proposals that provide new sports and recreation facilities and those which impact an existing facility. Both the school and Charnock Richard Junior Football Club have commented that the pitches within the track are still used effectively. Further, the use of the field has increased through the introduction of the tracks for the daily mile exercise. Overall, it is considered that this proposal would improve access and opportunities for physical activity through the retention of a track to enable pupils to complete the daily mile. The proposal is therefore considered to comply with the framework, Policy 24 of the Central Lancashire Core Strategy and Policies HW1 and HW2 of the Chorley Local Plan, and is therefore acceptable in principle. As the proposal relates to the redevelopment of an existing sports and recreational facility within an established school grounds, there would already likely to be some degree of impact from noise and disturbance in relation to nearby residential occupiers. It is not considered that the proposal would have any notable impact compared to the existing situation. The proposal would not, therefore, adversely affect neighbouring residential amenity. The proposed development is considered to be well designed and would not be harmful to the character and appearance of the area. Due to the objection from a statutory consultee, it is recommended that Planning Committee be minded to grant permission subject to conditions and the application be referred to the National Planning Casework Unit to determine whether the Secretary of State wishes to call the application in for decision. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Over to you, Councillor Heaton.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Shearer.
The running track was put in a couple of years ago. I think they didn't think they needed to put planning in for it, but this is a respected, what's the word? Application. Retrospective, that's it. They still play football on the middle. There's still room to play 2 pitches on the middle. The kids use it at school, and the local junior football club use it at the weekends. So I will move the recommendation.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Sherwood and Councillor Bean.
I'd like to second that, Chair. There are more than different sports, not just field sports. So that's great.
Chair, I was going to second it, but I just don't understand why Sports England objected to it, given that we've heard that the grass is still used for pitches. There is a multi-use thing, and it is a school. If they're playing sports, there is going to be noise anyway. So I just don't understand why they've objected to it. Thank you.
Right. Any more comments, or shall we move to the vote?
Move to the vote.
Okay. Members are minded to grant planning permission and refer the application to the National Planning Casework Unit to determine whether the Secretary of State wishes to call the application in for decision.